You won't believe what I just fucking found. Well, hello there. Welcome back. Did you miss me? I'm Malvina Declares, and welcome to another episode of the Palestine Archive, the series where I, as an antique dealer, have access to more historical items, and because of that, I bring you historical findings on Palestine. This right here, Ladies' Home Journal magazine from November 1927. As I was flipping through it, I came upon something that you will not believe. The last thing I expected to find in this magazine was something about Palestine, but nevertheless, I did. This is a 1927 article by Harry Emerson Fosdick, A Pilgrimage to Palestine. Here's the illustration, which is absolutely beautiful. But let's read it. I have not read it yet, so we're going to read it together. Jesus had doubtless been in Jerusalem many times before the last tragic week of his crucifixion. Having come with his family to the Passover when he was 12, it is natural to suppose that he accompanied them afterward on their annual pilgrimages. Indeed, according to the fourth Gospel, it is on his return from a sojourn there in his public ministry began that he encountered the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well. That well remains one of the most arresting sights in Palestine. Unhappily covered by a partially completed Greek Catholic church, it presents a painful example of ecclesiastical maltreatment of a sacred place. But even so, one may sit in open air outside the church and make the events of John's vivid chapter seem visually real. We borrowed a copy of the Greek New Testament from a priest and read together John's picturesque description of the interview. Despite the assurance of scholars that John the disciple could not have written the fourth Gospel, it seems incredible that whoever did describe the conversation at the well had not himself been there. We found ourselves surprised and fascinated at the correspondence. As we read the conversation, we could put in the very gestures that would fit the words. An Arab village named Askar, commonly regarded as the successor of ancient Sichar, lies up the valley in plain view, 10 minutes away on the rising ground of the hillside. Sitting at the wellside, weary with his walking, the master could have watched his disciples all their way to the village gates and could have seen the woman pass them coming down, jar upon her head, leaving the village spring with its hard water for the softer water of the sacred well. As for the stones itself, choked though by its fallen stones at the bottom, its 75 feet still witnessed that once it was very deep. The references in the conversation to the local scenery are certainly too pat to be accidental. Neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem, said Jesus, indicating towering Gerizim, whose steep flanks began to rise a few hundred yards across the road. Lift up your eyes and look on the fields, he added, and there in the valley grows still some of the fairest grain we saw in Palestine. Plenty of difficult, perhaps insoluble, problems are associated with the fourth Gospel, but whoever wrote this chapter had surely been at Jacob's well. By the route the Master made his final journey to Jerusalem, it is not easy to decide. Mark and Matthew suggest that he came down into Judea through Transjordania, called Perea in the Master's day. Luke tells us that he went by way of Samaria, and all unite in picturing his approach to Jerusalem from Jericho, which would suggest a Transjordan ministry. No necessary conflict is involved, only uncertainty as to the route he took. One thing, however, we are sure. His journey, apparently leisurely and extending, may be many months, carried him to Perea across Jordan. It is still one of the most fertile and sightly portions of Palestine. The hills are bolder, the valleys are more spacious and productive. Even in Samaria, and one Arab, unwittingly using a phrase of Jesus, told us gladly that his fields were yielding 60-fold. In the Master's day, it was the center of a thriving civilization, the remaining monuments of which are among the most impressive of the Holy Land. Important cities across Jordan originally were Greek, populated by Hellenists, who followed in the wake of Alexander's conquering armies. These cities lost their freedom to the Jews during the age of the Maccabees, and regained it only when Pompey seized the whole land from Rome and gave Transjordania a large measure of autonomy. Nevertheless, with the truculent Jewish population on one side and the desert with its overflow of plundering Arabs on the other, these foreign towns were in no comfortable place. 10 of them consolidated their joint interests in a league called the Decapolis. We hear of it in the Gospels. Folk came and thence to hear Jesus in Galilee, or returned thither to spread his fame, or welcomed his own coming into their borders. Of the chief roads of Transjordania, southeast of the Sea of Galilee, these flourishing centers stood, and in the ruins of the two of them, Gerusa and Philadelphia, are typical. They must have been populous in a wealthy town. One glorious day in March, we went out to Jerash, old Gerasa, lying some 40 miles beyond the Jordan fords. Transjordania now, as so often in its history, is in a parlous and uncertain state. Its people nervously feared the possible extension of Zionism across the river. They feel still the constant pressure of the Bedouin, whose long black tents are seen in all the valleys. They grow restive at the grip of Britain's hand and watch with deep concern the military airplanes with their dreaded bombs. The very tensity of the politics and restless resentment of the people and the fear of the Jews make the Transjordania a modern replica of old Perea. For so too, when Jesus came, the atmosphere was unquiet. The Greek cities with Romans over them, with Jews who hated them on one side and Arabs on their forays pressing from the other, were never safe from clutches of calamity. We sped out from Jordan over military roads, in building which the British rival Rome, and having lunched at the fords of Jabbok, where in the old days Jacob wrestled with the angel. We swung around the noble hills about the picturesque town of Esalt and came to Jerash, the ancient Greece. Let me know if you want to see part 2. My last account was banned as it reached 10,000 followers, and the Palestine Archives was really taking off. I spent 2 years building that following, so please support the Palestine Archives and share this video.